Hey, everybody. Welcome to Talking Stuff. This is the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast on the podcast. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Andrew Ellis. We've been on a little bit of a hiatus with this show while we reassess the scope and size and nature of the Ohio State recruiting machine. Andrew, some of that is because during January, Ohio State pretty much decided to not try to do any recruiting, which is fine. Same with February after the signing period, which ended uneventfully. The Buckeyes pretty much said, hey, you know what, we're going to wait until March, till spring practice begins to really get back on the recruiting horse. They have done that. There have been a lot of offers extended. They have added a commitment from Mark Nave, which we talked about on the podcast last week. But, other than that, it seems like the recruiting world for Ohio State right now is all about just trying to gear up for spring and summer. And now they're on spring break. So there's not a lot happening this week, but that gives us an opportunity to catch up and talk about things. First and foremost, how much on a scale of 1 to 10 would you say that you've missed doing this show and subsequently missed seeing my face?
Oh gosh. I mean, probably like a 15, I would say.
That's a lot higher than I was expecting.
Modest.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It's just been a quiet couple months. I mean, it's been weird, like it seems like Michigan's had people visiting and other schools have too. And Ohio State's just kind of been chugging along, going on vacations, Buckeye cruises, all that stuff, which, that's their right to take a little bit of a break, but March is going to be a different story. So here we are.
Yeah, and even in March, Ohio State's approach seems to be a little bit different. I mean, right now, they had 2 practices last week, Tuesday and Thursday. They did have players from around the state coming in. We saw Mylan Graham, the 4-star receiver from Fort Wayne, Indiana area, in and visiting. He's a big-time player for them and a top-of-the-board type guy. But other than that, it seems like they're kind of waiting until the weekends. They want guys to be able to come in on the 25th of March, which they're going to be doing a scrimmage, and it'll be a big weekend. April 1st, we'll have Student Appreciation Day at Ohio State. They're having a huge weekend April 1st, and then the spring game 2 weeks later. So there's going to be 3 fairly large-scale Ohio State recruiting weekends in the next month. But because everyone else is sort of like, the gate's open, let's, Katie bar the door, everyone else just rushing to it, and Ohio State has decided to take a more calculated approach. There's a couple reasons for that, and it's sort of been Ryan Day's MO since he took over at Ohio State. The primary reason is when you have 40 kids visiting, but you only have a couple hours to spend time with them. Are you really making personal connections? Are you really getting a sense of who these people are? Are you really getting a sense of who the families are? And the answer to that clearly is no. So right now, it's almost like an extended interview process for Ohio State. They did their in-season evaluations of players around the country in October and November. Then they've done their winter evaluations in January when they could get out on the road and see kids working out in their schools, etc. Now you have this interview process essentially where kids come to your campus and you get to figure out if they're a fit. And then you have the May evaluation period, the April and May evaluation period, where you go back on the road and you see them playing basketball, playing track, doing 7-on-7. So it's a very comprehensive look at all these kids. But I think to the fan, it seems like they're not doing much, but they really are. But it's all just kind of geared towards June and official visit season, which they've done for the last 4 years. So it's sort of on the same road that they've been on the last couple of years, but it feels like less active.
Yeah, and truth be told, I mentioned some kids visiting other schools, but it's not like we've got a bunch of 5-star prospects coming off the board left and right. So it's not like the rest of the country's on fire while Ohio State's just kind of sitting here doing nothing. But, it's just kind of somewhat of a dead period, and it's kind of the calm before the storm as far as what's going to happen over these next few months. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think some of that actually is because the Ohio State staff has recognized that the kids who are committing in January and February typically are either the in-state kids who are wanting to shut down and lock it down like Mark Nave, or kids who are just looking to make a splash, and those aren't even going to hold anyway. So the kids who are committing in June and July, generally speaking, are the ones that are going to last a little bit longer. In the world we're living in right now, early commitments basically are pointless. So, look at a guy like Jeremiah Smith, who is still, I want to be very clear how I say this, firmly committed to Ohio State, but he's going to take visits, and that's just the way it is. That's what we talked about when he committed in November. Like, this is going to be the case. So you have to take him at his word, where he says, I am committed to Ohio State. Like, he went to Georgia last weekend, but he's there with his teammates from South Florida Express visiting. And I'm going to tell you, and I know it sounds crazy, it's Georgia. They're obviously a great program. They're a team that everyone's worried about. That type of visit means absolutely nothing to Jeremiah Smith. He's there on campus for a couple hours. They're walking around, seeing facilities. Those things mean nothing. The amount of media coverage that comes after it, especially because he was in Atlanta for a Pylon 7-on-7 tournament the same weekend, the Georgia media conglomerate basically was set into action. And like, you see 3 days of nonstop. I mean, we've seen more Jeremiah Smith Georgia coverage in the last 3 days than we did about all these banks collapsing all over the United States. So like, I don't know. I don't think that those two things are on the same level. So don't worry about stuff like that. But at the same time, like, be advised that it's going to happen, right?
Yeah, and I think he was in Tallahassee the week before that also with his team. And I think afterwards there was some chatter about him returning for an official visit to Florida State. And then he tweeted something about not doing any more interviews or something. So you can just tell this process is probably getting annoying to him, and it's probably going to stay that way. So I guess that's unfortunate. Go ahead.
If you're looking for another reason why Ohio could use 7-on-7, this is why, folks. You get kids from all over the country getting a chance to come to Central Ohio and visit Ohio State on a couple hour window when they're like, that's huge. And these schools have all positioned themselves to be able to take advantage of that. Whatever. I'll get off the soapbox. No one wants to hear it. Heading into this episode of Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast, we don't generally plan things. I asked you to write down a few topics that you felt like maybe we should just discuss, talk about, bandy, about. I have not seen them. I don't know what they are, but I want you to sort of guide us through the mindset, the mentality of the Ohio State recruiting fan right now, in the questions that are, most prevalent, and the things that we should break down. So I'm going to toss it to you and let you sort of guide from here.
So, yeah, I'd say right now, just big picture where things are at for the 2024 class. We're sitting at 4 commitments. You mentioned Mark Nave being the most recent, Ian Moore also in the fold on the offensive line, and then Jeremiah Smith and Garrett Stover. So that's where things are at now. You got, various positions. It's not just a bunch of Brian Hartline 5-stars or anything like that. And I think the starting point for me is going to be the guy that I labeled as the number one most important recruit for Ohio State in this class. Not a quarterback, a running back. And that would be Jordan Marshall out of Cincinnati. I know he's got some stuff lined up. He's kind of targeting a summer, I want to say July decision timeline. He's the number one guy on the board for me. He's the number one target for Tony Alford. If he doesn't go to Ohio State, he's probably going to end up playing at Michigan. So I think that's kind of the starting point, is just where things are at with that. And that's kind of the big name the fans have been sort of fretting about lately because of Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Hart in Michigan did a great job early in this recruitment and really moved on Jordan Marshall before Ohio State did. And that's on the Buckeyes. I mean, they do typically go a little bit slower inside of the state. That is their way they have to be. But Michigan got a very real head start. Ohio State's done a great job closing that gap. Jordan Marshall was on campus on Martin Luther King Day in January. He's going to visit on April 1st. He's going to visit again on April 7th. He's going to take an official visit in June. Like, they're doing everything they can. Brian Hartline's involved. Tony Alford's involved. Ryan Day's involved. The entire coaching staff is recruiting him. I don't believe that, despite some recent predictions, or there haven't even been any recent predictions to Michigan, but things are moving apparently in Michigan's direction in other areas that's based entirely on nothing. There are a lot of things he likes about Michigan. He always has. He's a very cerebral kid. He's a kid that appreciates Blake Corum and the way he plays and the way Michigan runs the ball, as he should. Ohio State has turned into, over the last handful of years, a pass-first offense. I think that is something being held against Ohio State a little bit, despite the fact that they're still run. J.K. Dobbins ran for 2,000 yards in 2019, and people seem to forget about the fact that Ohio State in the last couple of years, I mean, Trey Sermon had a 400-yard rushing game in 2020, and they had 2,000-yard rushers basically the last 2 years. It's kind of weird to me that that gets held against Ohio State, but the real crux of the matter is that Michigan got a head start. And that is the risk you run when you are Ohio State. You are recruiting nationally. You are trying your hardest to make sure that you don't over offer in the state of Ohio, because there might be a kid like James Peoples in San Antonio, Texas, who you really, really like, who has Ohio roots. He's from Cleveland, his family's from Cleveland, et cetera. Like, you want to make sure you evaluate all these things. But if the Kentuckys of the world, the Michigans of the world, if they get involved, they're going to hold on tight because they see an opening. And that doesn't mean Ohio State's behind. I don't believe that they're behind for Jordan Marshall. I do believe that it is a battle. I could see Michigan winning it at this point, but I don't think it's anywhere close to complete. And I certainly don't think you're going to see Ohio State concede it at any point, especially, and even though Sam Williams-Dixon, who's transferred to Pickerington North from Millersburg, West Holmes, like, I think that there's a chance he could be the next commit off the board for Ohio State, and that's going to put some pressure on Tony Alford to figure out how to move things around. So the Buckeyes are going to have to figure out the right way to assuage that entire situation. But Jordan Marshall is priority one and has been since last October. And the Buckeyes have not lollygagged since then, and despite any assertions to the contrary.
So a very real chance we end up seeing a 2-man running back class that is fully from the state of Ohio. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that like I said, I don't believe that it's Ohio State trailing anyone for Jordan Marshall. I think that he is a kid who is getting all of his ducks in a row. I think probably like a lot of kids in his position, that order in your mind, which you always set. I mean, whether or not you're public about it, whether or not you tell people about it, you always have a order of preference for things in your mind. I think it probably changes somewhat regularly based on what else he's seeing, what else he's hearing. Much like the Georgia fanfare that we saw for Jeremiah Smith over the weekend. Like, sounds silly, but like, the Michigan recruiting media has done a great job of keeping Jordan Marshall at the forefront of all of their websites and all of their conversations. I don't think that's an accident. Like, that's when, everyone is pretty much working in concert to try to make it seem like, he's a bigger priority for Michigan than he is Ohio State. And that's just not the case. But it's going to be a battle till June, I think. But I don't think either way, because James Peoples' people are from Ohio, so I guess it could all end up from Ohio. Who knows? But
right,
I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible that Peoples and Marshall are Ohio State's running backs. So it's possible, but it's not likely.
Okay, so obviously Michigan is selling the whole, we run the ball more than any other program, that kind of thing. Whereas Ohio State is selling that they did not get a running back at all last recruiting class. So they're both kind of, they got these selling points that they're kind of working with. So we'll see how that one unfolds.
Jordan told me last month that one of the things he's really looking forward to when he gets back to Ohio State in April is the opportunity to sit down and talk with Travion Henderson, Mayan Williams, Dallin Hayden, et cetera, to get to know those guys, to figure out what life as an Ohio State Buckeye is like. That is important for a kid like him, because again, he is bright. He is very focused on life outside of football as well. He wants to see everything that it entails. But I think he's also going to be smart enough to look at it and say, by the time I'm on campus, the very real possibility is that Travion Henderson is gone, Mayan Williams is gone, Chip Trainum is gone, and then either Dallin Hayden or Evan Pryor may very well also be gone. So it's not like you just don't have a 2023 running back. You're losing 60% of that room by the time you step on campus. That is a major opportunity that I can guarantee you Ohio State is making him aware of.
Right. So lots of happenings coming up for Tony Alford in that situation. Next kind of topic on the agenda for me is the whole quarterback recruiting situation. Aaron Nolan was just offered by Clemson. We know Clemson is pretty selective with who they throw offers at. You've got the whole Jaden Davis thing. Is Ohio State a factor? Is Ohio State not a factor? Is he going to go to Michigan? And then Alabama commit Julian Sayin. So where do things stand in that whole situation in your eyes, I guess?
I think if Ohio State had their pick today, it would be Julian Sayin. But the question is, how easy is it to flip a kid from Alabama who committed to Alabama before Tommy Rees got there, when Tommy Rees was the quarterbacks coach at Notre Dame, who he really, really liked early in his recruiting process? That actually probably helped Alabama a lot. Ohio State is being aggressive. I mean, they are recruiting him hard. They are working to try to get him on campus. I tend to think at some juncture he will visit, just because everyone, once you're going through this process, there comes a point when you say, I just need to make sure. I just have to be 100%. And it's normal for a 17-year-old to have those sort of questions and doubts. Not doubts about Alabama. You know what Alabama is, but you're still going to want to just have something else to stack it up against. Aaron Noland is fascinating. I mean, the kid's a fascinating prospect. This is going to sound stupid. I do believe if he was right-handed, Ohio State would have offered him already. If that, like, it shouldn't matter, but it does matter. Like, it changes things a little bit when you're dealing with a left-handed quarterback. And I don't think it's enough of a thing to say, well, they'll never offer him, because I do think that they will probably offer him once he gets on campus on April 1st or that weekend. Especially now that Clemson's offered, because they're another team that's really local, and obviously Georgia has Puglisi at quarterback, and they're still in the Dylan Raiola sweepstakes. The fascinating character in this entire thing is Jaden Davis, and it is clear the Ohio State is trying to get back into that mix. They're trying to rebuild a relationship, but when you look at Clemson in South Carolina, where Jaden from South Carolina originally, plays obviously in Charlotte. There's so many reasons that the Tigers make sense for him, but it seems like they just aren't interested in recruiting him very hard. And I don't know why. Again, I'm so conflicted on the Jaden Davis stuff, because from a physical standpoint, I understand that maybe he's not an ideal prototypical size. He's probably 6 foot, and I don't know that he's going to get taller. But he throws the ball really, really well. He's uber competitive. And there's a lot to really like about his game. But for some reason, it seems like teams are reluctant to go all in on him, other than Michigan, which has certainly done that. But they have to, recalibrate a little bit with Kirk, the new quarterbacks coach, Kirk, you know his name, after replacing Matt Weiss. What is his name? Kirk Campbell.
Campbell, there you go. There you go.
So, when you're replacing a quarterbacks coach, obviously Jim Harbaugh, like Ryan Day, is the guy that does most of the work with the quarterbacks, I think. So that, that doesn't hurt Michigan as much as it would hurt someone else in that position. But I wrote about it about a month ago. And to me, if Jaden Davis gets on campus at some point this spring, raise the antenna and be like, oh, that's interesting. But otherwise, I think it seems to me like that's still a long shot for Ohio State. Aaron Noland, the connection to Jelani Thurman, who was his tight end at Langston Hughes, like Fairburn. I was confusing Fairburn with the high school.
Right.
That's what happens. I think that relationship is important enough, and it opens the door for Ohio State to consider him even more. His tape's really good. Major stats. He's a winner, 15-0 last year, state champion. Like, there's a ton of things to like about him. He plays with Jeremiah Smith, and sometimes for 7-on-7, like that helps. There's a connection already building there. But I know it's stupid, but I think if he was right-handed, he would have had an offer already.
Right.
Have you ever caught a pass? Have you ever caught a pass from a left-handed thrower?
No, but it is funky just watching them throw. I think that every time I see it, it's strange.
It's bizarre to me, because in other sports like baseball, a left-handed swing looks more natural, and in golf, like a left-handed swing looks so poetic. But like throwing a football, a left-handed passer just looks funky. It's like a third baseman who's left-handed. It just doesn't look right, because it's not right, because it's left.
There you go. Nailed it.
Get it?
I do. So I had a couple of wide receiver things. We touched on that. Jeremiah Smith's committed. Mylan Graham is one of the top guys. You got Josiah Trader. You got Micah Hudson, kid in Florida, Terrence Moore, right? Yeah. Guys like that. So, I mean, we know what Brian Hartline's going to do. We know Jeremiah Smith is going to go places with his 7-on-7 team, and there's no reason to freak out. That's the long and short of it, I guess.
Yeah, and don't freak out, because that 7-on-7 team will probably be in Columbus on April 1st, like they were the last couple of years for Student Appreciation Day. And you'll see a whole bevy of South Florida Express kids show up, and it'll be like, oh my gosh, Ohio State's the favorite for all these kids, because South Florida Express kids love Ohio State. Ohio State loves them. That's the way it works. TJ Moore
Right.
down in Tampa is the kid that I personally saw, seeing him in Miami back in January. That kid's a stud. I don't know how easy it is to get him out of the South. He's been making some visits around. Clemson's sort of been the team that's penciled in for him. But like, I honestly think right now, if you're Ohio State and you could, circle Mylan Graham, Terrence Moore, and Jeremiah Smith, you have one of the best 3-man recruiting classes at wide receiver I've ever seen. Just pure upside all over the place. And then you still go fight to the nail, to the wire for JoJo Trader. Nothing's going to happen there till like December that makes any difference. So there's no point in getting too worked up about anything you see from him. But the relationship with him and Brian Hartline stays really good. Keenan Bailey's very involved in those recruitments because he's a South Florida guy as well, and just keep swinging.
Just keep swinging. There you go.
Because you can't worry about Brian Hartline's recruiting. Like, you just can't. Like, it's going to be fine
until he accepts the offensive coordinator job at Miami, right?
Right. I mean, that, you never know, I guess. That's certainly a possibility. Yeah. If they need a third one in 3 years, who knows?
Right. Offensive line. So we said 2 in the fold now, Moore and Nave. Going to be a big offensive line class, especially when you consider that you're targeting 2 twins in the state of Ohio that are probably Ohio State lean. Right, exactly. So assuming the Armstrong twins end up at Ohio State, that already takes you up to 4. So we're probably looking at a 5 to 6 man class for Justin Fry, correct?
Yeah, I think 6 is the number I've had circled for a while. I know that people in Ohio are a little bit like wondering, we saw a crystal ball from 247 Steve Wiltfong on Monday with Ben Roebuck to Michigan, which is not really a surprise. They've been recruiting him pretty hard for a while. Right. Ohio State, like I said, when you're talking about that multi-pronged evaluation approach, they've seen Ben Roebuck in the summer, they've seen him in the fall, they've seen him in the winter. They haven't offered. And I think while you can appreciate Sharon Moore and what Michigan has done on the offensive line the last 2 years, back-to-back Joe Moore awards, blah, 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 you're paying Justin Fry to evaluate offensive linemen, not Sharon Moore. So if Justin Fry thinks that Mark Nave and the Armstrong twins are a better group and more upside long-term than Luke Hamilton and Ben Roebuck, you pretty much just have to accept it and realize that Ohio State is not going to make that push. Same thing with William Satterwhite at Akron Hoban. Right. It seems like Ohio State spent the spring or the summer, the fall, the winter evaluating those offensive linemen from Ohio, Satterwhite, the Armstrong twins, Nave, Roebuck, and Hamilton, and settled on the 3 that they offered. So I think you have to be confident that Justin Fry has a pretty good sense of what he's doing. Whose evaluation should mean more to Ohio State? Justin Fry's or Sharon Moore?
Right. Fair point.
Maybe I just went off on a tangent there that you weren't even going to talk about, but I feel like people wonder, like, why isn't Ohio State offering these kids? And Michigan is turning around and using the fact that this Ted Hammond down in Cincinnati and, Hamilton and Roebuck, look at all these Ohio kids go to Ohio State. Until Ohio State offers any one of them, it's an irrelevant and absolutely moot conversation. So I don't know. I don't know how much weight those guys carry when it comes to the players that Ohio State has offered that Michigan's recruiting, like Bryce West, Aaron Scott, et cetera, but Jordan Marshall, so on.
Right. And that's, go ahead.
No, you.
I was going to say that's a nice segue into the one defensive position group I wanted to touch on, which is cornerback. And if Michigan does pull a guy like Bryce West or someone of that caliber, like an Aaron Scott, then that would be a legitimate major recruiting win for them over Ohio State. I would say, would hurt. Yeah, that'd be a blow. I would say that we don't really expect that right now. Granted, Bryce West has been up there multiple times, I believe. But the cornerback recruiting situation is interesting because you have those 2 local studs, and then you got guys in Florida, Texas, California too, that are like right at the top of the board. So I guess just big picture cornerback stuff right now, like where do you see that going? Where do you see that at?
I wrote about the defensive backs at ohiostate.rivals.com on Tuesday. And the more I'm like crunching the numbers, I can see Ohio State actually taking 4 cornerbacks in this class because they will wait until the very end for Bryce West and Aaron Scott. I don't know if both of those guys will wait until December to make a decision. I'm pretty confident Bryce West will, because that is just the Glenville way. I fully expect, despite the circuitous route to get there, that both Scott and West will end up at Ohio State. But you can't take anything for granted anymore. It's 2023. The NIL space exists. Michigan's playing good football. They've won the back-to-back Big Ten championships. They're trying to force their way into Ohio. Like, that's the way you have to fight to keep these kids in the state. Miles Lockhart in Arizona, I think that he's going to visit next month and then take an official visit in June. I would not be surprised if he tries to commit in April, and I would not be surprised if that sort of resets the final spot for Ohio State. I think if you have the mindset that Bryce West and Aaron Scott and Miles Lockhart are in, not to say that we're playing in or out at this point, but let's say that those guys are in, you get very, very selective with that 4th spot, right? So, and the Ohio State evaluation may not always match up with the rankings. Xavier Brown, for example, is the number 7 ranked corner in the country, according to Rivals. Marcellus Williams out in California, also at St. John Bosco, where Brown's at Mater Dei, number 10 ranked corner. There's Kobe Black from Texas, who's the number 4 ranked corner. And then there's Charles Lester, the number 2 ranked corner in the country, who, a lot of buzz about Florida State in the last few days. I fully expect that he will be on campus at Ohio State in early April. If the South Florida Express team makes it up to Ohio State, he will be there. If that happens, and then he's willing to wait until June for the official visit, then you got a real shot. That, they're going to swing at the top of the list if you can feel if they're confident that you have things in order with Bryce West and Aaron Scott. You can do a lot of different things in this class at corner, because there's also guys in the state like Terry and Nichols and Coy Beasley down in Cincinnati who are really good players and are worth taking longer looks at. So I don't know how you fit in all these guys, but I know they'd like to fit in more, because you're talking 4 corners and maybe 4 more safeties.
Right. And that makes sense. So those were kind of the main position groups I wanted to touch on, but I did, for the fans, wanted to have a quick in or out game with you.
Love it.
If you are.
I'm amenable.
That's good to hear. 3 of them today, and one kind of different one is, I'm going to save kind of the wild card one for the last. So we'll start with running back Jordan Marshall.
Oof, go right to the most challenging one. I really don't like to be, the guy who splits the baby, but it could go either way. And I at the end of the day, Jordan Marshall's from Ohio. Ohio State is absolutely prioritizing him. It is not a situation where they are, 1 foot on the cement, 1 foot in the pool. Like, they want Jordan Marshall. If I can't remember the last time a player from inside of Ohio that the Buckeyes really wanted and recruited aggressively and recruited as a priority picked Michigan over Ohio State. Now, again, the world has changed quite a bit in the last few years, and we understand that. But I do think that Jordan is the type of player who could buck that trend because he is a very independent thinker. But I still think he's in. It's going to be a fight, but I have a tough time seeing the loss. That's. I know people are gonna make it. Like, if I'm putting a percentage on that, which I freaking hate percentages, I'm talking like 52%. Like, it's barely over the threshold. But that kid grew up wanting to play at Ohio State, and it matters.
Right. Okay. Moving to the offensive line, not a name that I mentioned earlier, just because I kind of wanted to save this one, but Washington, D.C., Jordan Sayin. I think he's a top 20 prospect regardless of position, listed as a guard on Rivals. I think he's one of those guys that can play multiple spots. I know he was just at Georgia. You know how Georgia does on the recruiting trail. What are your thoughts on that one, in or out for Jordan Sayin?
I think Jordan Sayin is almost certainly the barometer for exactly how good Justin Fry can be as a recruiter. Because if you're talking about a kid who in other cycles prior to Justin Fry's arrival would certainly have ended up at Alabama or Georgia, Jordan Sayin is probably one of that dude. He's probably that dude. But I think that a lot, and I realize the risk I'm running when I say this, a lot of the talk about other schools in this instance, my personal belief is that it is meant to drum up interest and drama. And not that Jordan wants drama, and not that he's the one doing it, but I think that Ohio State did a really good job of establishing the relationship early, similar to Michigan and Jordan Marshall, right? If you get in there early and you really connect with someone early, you've had multiple visits early, that carries a lot of weight and that goes a long way. So I think Jordan Sayin will be in at some juncture for Ohio State. I think he was really close to committing to the Buckeyes a couple times back in the fall. Obviously, those winter months, things get cold and stagnant, and the Buckeyes aren't out on the road, and there's not a lot of visits. So I think it opens the door for kids to go down south and see other places. But ultimately, I think that the relationship with Justin Fry carries that, and I think in still.
Okay. I mentioned this on the forum, but that one just kind of gives me some Ernest Green vibes from last cycle. So we'll see.
There's a reason. I mean, I totally understand the reason that you would pause a little bit and be like, oh, I don't know, that doesn't make sense, because like he wanted to commit to Ohio State and then he didn't, and then all of a sudden he's tied to Georgia and Alabama, and like, oh crap, that's not ideal. But this is where you just have to really believe that the relationship that Justin Fry has built is better than the relationship that Greg Studrara built with Ernest Green. You dig?
That's fair. Yeah, I dig. So last one, a little bit of a curveball, I guess. So 2023 safety, former Notre Dame signee who has been released from his letter of intent for I don't know what reason, but he's been offered by everyone lately, including Ohio State. That would be Brandon Hillman.
Portsmouth, Virginia, 6'1", 210. His entire tape is at quarterback. Like, it's kind of weird.
Right.
But Ohio State would not offer in this situation unless they, A, really thought they wanted another safety, and B, thought that they could get this kid in the class, because it's March 15th, and beware the Ides of March, because that means things are changing. And the Buckeyes obviously felt like when they reviewed the tape and looked at the numbers, the athleticism pops. I mean, he's got a 40-inch vertical. He's rocked up at 6'1", 210. Sub 4.7 guy right now in high school. That's plenty fast for a safety. I think his wingspan is like that of like a 6'6" kid. So there's long, athletic, rangy type. Lot to like. Michigan was certainly, I think, feeling confident immediately after he reopened his recruitment. There was some talk about visiting Ohio State this weekend. That's not going to happen. The Buckeyes are on vacation. No Ohio State coaches are in town, so not sure he would have any reason to make that trip. But I'm going to say out right now just because he's never been there, and it seems like there's an opportunity for other schools like Michigan. If he went to visit there this week, for example, I don't know what his plans are. I have not spoken to him yet. If he goes and visits there right now, you could see a real push to say, hey, we need you right now. This is, so I'm going to say out, but if this gets to next Wednesday and he's taking an official visit to Ohio State, consider me on the other side of that, but there's going to be a lot of opportunities for this kid, because it's like a free second chance for a lot of people to go out and fix a hole in their recruiting class.
And
what else?
He'd be the fourth safety, wouldn't he?
Yeah, and that's but that's what Ohio State wanted to begin with. I mean, obviously they were recruiting Caleb Downs. They were going to take 4, and I think the question is legitimate. We don't exactly know where Cedric Hawkins fits into the defense at this point. He was the first. He stayed committed, did all the right things. He doesn't enroll till June. I assume he's going to be like a slot safety. I don't, the Jaden Bonsu recruitment took a very weird turn on signing day. And if he doesn't feel like he gets enough run right away at Ohio State, or doesn't have the opportunity, and this is something I talked about on the podcast daily this morning with Austin and Bill. If you look at that roster right now, there's 9 safeties, but by this, in the next 2 years, 6 of them will be gone. So at least 6. So like there's an opportunity for these young guys to really step in and make a difference. And especially when you consider that Hawkins is not your prototypical safety and you are trying to figure out the Bonsu situation, who could be, everyone thought he was going to be a linebacker. Like there's a lot of gray area at that room. So I think it makes sense to try to get one. If you are sold that he has the athletic ability to make an impact, which if you watch this kid and you see his numbers, you can understand why. And that's, that's ultimately the decision that Ohio State had to make. They had to make it quickly. And I think the fact that even though they were on vacation and still went immediately and said, hey, okay, we want to talk to you, we want to offer you, is telling to me.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Those are the 3 big ones I had, but I will ask one more question. It's not an in or out. It's more like a yes or no. I know, very serious. Jaden Davis, will he end up visiting? I know, right? Curveballs I'm throwing at you. Will Jaden Davis end up visiting Ohio State?
I don't think so. I really don't. I know that there's continued talk about it. I feel like Jaden, understandably, probably has a little bit too large of an axe to grind with Ohio State after the decision that they made to essentially tell him on his way to Columbus for a visit last year for the spring game, don't worry about coming because Dylan's going to be there. I can understand the Ohio State perspective as well, which was, dude, you had 6 months where you were the clear-cut number 1 guy. Yep. You could have committed. You didn't. But, when you're dealing with emotions and egos of 17-year-old kids who have the rest of college football telling you got screwed over, it's hard to fix that despite the best efforts of Ohio State. I just don't think that will be the way it goes at this point. So I hope it does. I really like Jaden. Got to know him a lot. I really like him as a person and his family, and I think that they are a really good fit for what Ohio State wants at the position. But if he's harboring some resentment, you can understand it, or I can understand it. I don't know about you. You seem quick to judge and difficult to forgive. But
yeah, I am. I have an axe to grind with the world.
That's fine. I understand.
Yeah. I agree with everything you said about Davis. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think there's a few other guys. People there's a handful of really interesting players that need to be discussed at some point. And I promise, folks, we're going to try to make this a more regular thing, especially through the spring and the busy recruiting periods. If you join us over at Ohio State Rivals, OhioState.rivals.com, and follow up, we'll put in some threads there for questions that we can break down and try to make sure that we're staying topical. But I do have a tendency to ramble on this show because I have a tendency to ramble all the time, anywhere I go, which is why I'm not allowed to go to Walgreens by myself, because I'm like, oh, do you see this? Nice. I like these new M&Ms. And then all of a sudden, 15 minutes later, I'm still talking about the M&Ms with the person behind the counter. And I'm like, oh, I hope they make these colors in peanut. And no one cares. No one cares. But
I don't really like peanut M&Ms, to be honest.
Really? That's ironic, considering your head looks exactly like one.
I know it does, but I'm like a peanut butter guy. Everybody likes peanut. I'm peanut butter. So,
is it time to do a M&M power ranking?
Might be.
Peanut butter is I don't know that I can really do a full power ranking, but I will tell you the caramel M&Ms are just incredible. You should, if you like caramel, you should have those.
Yeah, those are good. They're tier 1 for me.
And then there's the Rice Krispie style. Yep. Those are great. And then peanut butter, then peanut, then regular. I think I'm not trying to get into all the fancy flavors, the, brownie fudge or the Peeps flavor or any of that stuff. Get that crap out of here is what I would say to that. I don't need that. Don't bring that weak stuff in here is what I would say. If Mars Company was like, hey, Jeremy, what's your impression of these Peeps M&Ms? I would say, get those out of here. Nobody wants those, But
I can't even imagine. Peeps M&M. I don't even want to think about that thought. But Yeah.
Well, here's the last thing I want to say before we sign off this episode of Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast on the podcast. Do you think it's weird that in the last minute I said caramel and then said caramel? Because I don't know that I say it the same way any 2 times in a row ever, and I don't know what's right. So if you're listening, in the comments, tell me if you say caramel with 3 syllables or caramel with 2, because I would like to know which way I should aim to serve you on that front. What do you say?
I did notice you did that, but Caramello, I think it's called, is an underrated candy bar.
Very good candy bar. It's very, yeah. I'm a huge fan of just caramel in general, in any format, in any sort of arrangement. Even if it's the pressed chocolate with the caramello, way to go. In an M&M, great. I mean, you can't go wrong really with those. But America, you tell us, 3 syllables or 2 syllables. Head over to ohiostate.rivals.com. You can join us there if you've already done so. Thank you. If you haven't, you can use promo code DTE30 to get a free month with the site. That's where myself, Bill Landis, Austin Ward, and Andrew Ellis hang out in the Horseshoe Lounge over there. Again, thank you for the patience with Talking Stuff. We will do our best to be more active in it. I just want to make sure we have stuff to talk about. That's all, because otherwise I just talk about M&Ms. So that's all. Anything else for you, Andrew?
No, that's it. We're good.
All right. Okay. Have a good day, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. See you next time.